Ladies and gentlemen, signore e signori, buonasera, benvenuti. Welcome to you all. You're most welcome to tonight's lecture. We're really delighted to see a good crowd and a good crowd joining us online as well. You're all very welcome. Just to remind you that the lecture is being recorded and it will go up on our YouTube channel in due course. Those of you attending online are very welcome to join the Q&A session by putting your questions into the Q&A function on your computers. And those of you in the room, when we have the Q&A session after the event, we will pass a microphone round so that they can hear you wherever they are. So thank you very much. So I'm really delighted to be welcoming tonight's speaker. She's very well known to all of us here at the BSR and to many of you here tonight as well, and to many in Rome. She's been here on this podium in my role on a number of occasions since she arrived here at the BSR, and it's overdue that we hear from her in her own right as an academic and a researcher, which can be the bit of ourselves that we sometimes lose sight of in the hurly-burly of our day jobs. And it's very important and useful to reconnect with that researcher self from time to time. So we're really delighted to be welcoming Raphaële Mouren, who joined the BSR in May 2022. She is our head of research collections. She was previously librarian at the Warburg Institute and reader in history of the book and libraries at the University of London. Raphaële is a specialist in the transmission of the classical world to the Renaissance. She focuses particularly on the history of the book, the history of philology, particularly the learned book, the humanist book, and Italy in the 16th century. She thinks a lot in her work about libraries and the transmission of texts through and around libraries, and she's been working in particular recently on the transmission of Greek manuscripts from the Byzantine Empire. She's been running a seminar series here at the BSR on that topic for the last year and a half, and a sort of cultural history of Florence and Rome. And she publishes regularly and presents her research in these fields all over the place. Raphaële's also currently running a really exciting research project funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council on Greek manuscripts in Renaissance Venice, the library of Guillaume Pélissier, and its contribution to Europe's intellectual heritage. This is an ongoing collaboration between the British School at Rome, the Warburg Institute in London, as well as the University of Torino, and perhaps she might mention it at some point in her percorso this evening. So tonight, I understand we're going with Raphaële on a sort of Proustian journey across her academic career, thinking about how she arrived where she is today from where she started, and focusing in particular on the miracle of collaboration that is the early modern book and its coming into being. I feel that our daily lives here at the BSR are a small miracle of collaboration in so many ways. And so we're sort of celebrating that tonight in the topic of Raphaële's lecture. So I'm really delighted to be welcoming her to talk to us about the humanist, the printer and the prince books in Renaissance Italy. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Good evening. I want to say first that it's an honor to be here today, and it's also an honor to work at the British School at Rome. I'm not saying it. A colleague of ours who is here today told me that, and I couldn't say it better. So today, like you were told a minute ago, I'm here in front of you as a researcher. It is not what occupies most of my days, but I'm still very happy that I can manage my current funded research project. I can speak in conferences, very few, and write articles, very few. But that's still important for us, and I'm very thankful that I can keep doing that. So as you were told a minute ago, the fil rouge today will be something I used to tell my students when I was speaking about books in Greek and Latin printed in the 16th century. It takes a miracle to make a book. So actually not a miracle, because we are in Rome, we have to be very careful about our words. So it's not really a miracle. It's more that it needs the conjunction of the right people decided to make the book happen. It needs efforts and a strong will to see it happening. It needs money, and it also needs luck. And lack of luck kills project more often than one would think, as we know for many manuscripts that we have of books that were never published. So I try to look back at how did it begin for me. Let's say it began with Aeschylus. I arrived many years ago at the École des Chartes in Paris after a maîtrise, a Master of Research in classics, in Greek actually, and 2 years of intensive Latin and history to prepare the concorso and enter the École des Chartes, where there was no Greek, and Greek was something essential for me. So I decided to do something that I was able to do at that time. I just crossed the courtyard and I went to the École pratique des hautes études, and I decided to attend the lessons of Professor Jean Irigoyen and Brigitte Mondrin. And when I went to introduce myself to Jean Irigoyen, he immediately told me, why don't you study L'Aeschylus Victorius, the victorious edition of Aeschylus? That was by pure chance an excellent fit. I was very happy with the idea of looking back at Aeschylus after having spent so much time studying the 7 against Thebes during my MS. And I had loved very much the 16th century when I was studying 20 centuries of history for the concorso. First, I had to find who was victorious. So I headed to the famous and infamous bibliographic room in the basement of the Bibliothèque Nationale in Rue de Richelieu. That's all how old I am. If you know, you know. And I discovered Piero Vettori. Some of you may have expected me not to speak about Piero Vettori, but I think you were very few. So Piero Vettori was a central figure of his time. And he was hardly studied at that time, 35 years ago. He was temporarily abandoned, and fortunately, it is not the case anymore. And in recent years, there have been doctoral dissertations, articles, and chapters, and a lot in Italy in particular, that put him back in the radar of history of scholarship, and I'm very happy about that. So he was born in 1499. He died in 1585, so it's good to study Greek and Latin. He was a Florentine from a very important family. He was a cousin of Francesco and Jacopo Vettori. He was related to many other families in Florence. His family house was Oltrarno. And if you walk along Via Miaggio today in Florence, you can see the buildings of many important families from the 16th century that were all related and linked and member of the same Gonfalone and church Santo Spirito. He grew up in Florence, played an active part in the last Republic between 1527 and 1530. Then after 1530, of course, like a lot of people, he was a bit in difficult situation. So he tried to find a job elsewhere, in Rome in particular. He didn't succeed, and he ended appointed professor in 1538 by Cosimo de' Medici, Duke, then Grand Duke of Florence. He will teach all his life. He will deliver speeches in important occasions. He will occupy various charges, some very prestigious over the years. And most importantly for us, he actively prepared editions of ancient texts. His books were well known, awaited by European humanists and sought after. He was at the center of what was beginning to be the Republic of Letters, and we still have numerous letters that sent or received by him or to him in Italian, in Latin mostly, that give us a lot of information about his interest, the way he worked, and who would play a role in helping him preparing his books and making them published. The 16th century was called the Saeculum Victorianum by Rudolf Pfeiffer. So Vettori, who began his career in the 1530s, a bit late, played a huge role in the dissemination of classical text in the best possible version that could be prepared at that time. He made a lot of friends, a few enemies, and a lot of admirers. Some of his books, like the 1560 edition of Aristotle's Poetics, were considered the best and were used for a very long time. Piero Vettori, in a way, is part of the first generation of early modern professional professors in the field of Greek and Latin. He was not concerned with religious polemics, although we have traces of him helping German students having problems in Italy, problems with the Inquisition in Venice, and needing a loan of money to go back home very quickly. He's not concerned with the Questione della Lingua, although he was a member of the Accademia Fiorentina from its beginning, and he wrote a Trattato della coltivazione degli ulivi that ended in the Dizionario dell'Accademia della Crusca. He never took part in discussions on Dante or Boccaccio. During his lifetime, Vettori acquired an extraordinary and international recognition. The basis of this notoriety was his publications, of course. The impact of his very first book, a complete edition of Cicero, couldn't be ignored, but also his lessons and his teaching that were renowned, not only in Italy, but also elsewhere. Visitors were coming to attend these lessons for a few days or weeks. So how did it begin? Or when did it went well, went bad? So first I opened the book. Sorry, I should have said that it was known, and there's a lot of medals were carved, and you say engravings and portraits have been done in the 16th century and afterwards. I know it's not very... So how did it begin? I opened the book. I went to the National Library and I opened the book and I began to look at the book and read the first pages. And I think it was, if I remember well, it was the first time I had a book that old in front of me, and I was opening it and turning the pages. I'm quite happy with this PowerPoint thing. So it was a very beautiful book. It was a bit unusual in Vettori's career, but I couldn't know it at that time. It's an in-quarto, a bit like that, quite big in-quarto. It was printed by Henri Etienne in 1557, the first year he began printing on his own name in Geneva, where he joined his father, Robert Etienne, who had left Paris for Geneva in 1550 and became a Calvinist. Coming from classical studies, my first approach was in the text, the way Vettori would have used manuscript to decide what was for him the text of the place. This edition was well known. The tradition of Aeschylus manuscript was well established from Alexander Turin onwards, and Martin West's edition for Teubner has just been published with a rich apparatus criticus. Two books had been recently published on the printed tradition of Aeschylus in early modern time by G.A. Gross and Monique Mondobché. So yes, for this author, at least, understanding what text the curator would have used was quite easy. It's not always the case, and it's not always the most straightforward part of the study. And for example, it didn't work very well for the scholia. A few scholia are printed in the book, and even when using Ole Smith's edition of the scholia, I couldn't manage to arrive with a proper apparatus criticus. I have sigils of manuscript. It doesn't make sense. So this is a mystery I could never solve. I soon discovered that this edition, the third edition to be printed, was important because Vettori was the first to publish 7 plays. Until then, only 6 plays were known, more or less. This was due to the fact that the famous old manuscripts, the Medicius, the 10th century manuscripts then and still now in Florence, was lacking a few sheets of parchment that were lost. They were separated somewhere in the middle of a quire. Sheets had disappeared. So although it's written, you cannot see it, but you can believe me, it's written in a manuscript that a few pages are missing, and on On the page on the left, it says that pages are missing, and on the page on the right, it says that we are changing play. The first play was Agamemnon, and this one is the libation bearers, the coephorol. So people knew that there was a problem, but they didn't have the solution. Vettori used another tradition of the text coming from Demetrius Triclinius, known through two manuscripts. One that was already in Florence in the Medici library, and the other one that was in the Farnese library in Rome. So with the help of these two manuscripts, he published 7 plays. So from the original idea of l'Eschylus Victorius, how did it change so much? I think my interest shifted from the result to the process, drifting away from a philological study to a more historical approach, including history of the book, history of libraries, history of the intellectual life, and so on. Because it was what I was learning at that time at the École des Chartes, and because I really think that it's important to try to look at everything when you study an object like that. So for me, it became clear very soon that studying this edition, yes, involved looking at the text, identifying the manuscript used, the choices made to prepare the edition, comparing its variants, and it still occupies a lot of space in my dissertation. But I think that very soon my central interest became about book, about people on books. I began asking myself a lot of questions. Which manuscripts were available? Which manuscripts were available for Vettori? Were they localized? Which manuscripts were known? And were they available for him or for someone else? Why was the book printed in Geneva by Henri Etienne? What was the process of preparing a book? And what was the communication between people, and particularly with the printer, to prepare the book, in that case, almost known, as we will see. Aeschylus is just one example, of course, a case study, and in a way from a micro-history approach, which is what it was already giving me a lot of insight on what was happening in the 16th century in the world of philologists, scholarship, and learned printing. It made me understand the ranges of sources that were or could be at my disposal. Studying Vettori's Aeschylus for the École des Chartes thesis rapidly led me to extend my research to Vettori's career that I studied for a diploma that doesn't exist anymore, which makes it complicated in your CV, a kind of propedeutical year preparing to a PhD, and then to a PhD. And I began to try to make a list of available sources. It was what I was learning at that time. You need to find your sources and prepare a typology of your sources. And I discovered an entire world. It led me also to London at the British Museum, to Munich at the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek, to Rome, to Florence, to Naples. It led me to reactivate my Italian, a language I had studied many years ago but had to abandon. It led me to all these places, but Rome in particular, the sources that were available in Rome in the Vatican Library, the people, the scholars I will meet here and there, meet me at the bar, is something you hear when you use regularly the Vatican Library. If you know, you know. Studying Vettori's network meant building my own. So I spent days and days at the British Museum, discovering how this network, something that we could consider the beginning of the Republic of Letters, was organized, finding recommendation letters of young scholars, Italian and foreigners, touring the country, letters with printers, with other scholars, with princes, with bishops and cardinals and popes. A network of Vettori born in Florence, in his neighborhood, increased during the Republic of Florence. For example, after that, he kept in contact all his life with the Fuoriciti in Rome around Cardinal Salviati or Gaddi. Network enlarged with Vettori's stays in Rome in 1538 and in 1555. a network of former students becoming cardinals, sons of neighbors becoming popes. That's very posh. Distinguished visitors stopping in Florence to attend a few lessons to visit him. Unfortunately, I saw once something and I lost it. It's a kind of vademecum for German students from Catholic areas visiting Italy. There was something saying, oh, you need to stop to go to see Vettori. It will be in Florence, or it will be in his family estate in the summer. So don't worry. He can be a bit grumpy, but his wife is charming and she will give you something to eat. I don't know where I lost. It was a paper. I don't know where it is. If someone find that for me, I would very like that. So in this letter, I discovered scholars and friends asking his opinion on anything really, on the meaning of a phrase from Aristotle's Rhetorics, but also on geography, botanics. So you think these plants will be better on the sun or with not too much sun or things like that. Sharing their opinions, telling him stories, what is happening in Rome, in Lyon, what they see during their travels, books they spotted when stopping in bookshop in Paris, anything, hundreds of letters. And that was fascinating because I was spending my day from 9 to 5:30 in the British Museum and then going outside in Bloomsbury. And that was something absolutely incredible for me as a young student. And I had no idea that a few years later, I would work on the other side of the road. So I have studying Vettori and his network for almost 30 years now, and I haven't finished. The reason for this is mostly the length of his career and the richness of the sources I have at my disposal. Too many. And there are too many, and also the typology is too large. Of course, we have the result of his works. The printed books are there to be read, including prefaces and dedicatory letters that give a lot of information. I already spoke about the correspondence, but we also have his library, his printed books, sometimes highly annotated, notes, manuscripts with text copied for him. And I don't even count additional material that I could find in Florence, in the Archivio di Stato, in the Biblioteca Nazionale, or in Rome here, at the Vatican Library, at the National Biblioteca Nazionale. All of this offers a rare understanding of his working methods and also what kind of collaboration he will receive and from whom. So although I have expanded my research over time to the study of libraries, to the history of printing in the 16th century Lyon, for example, I still come back regularly to Vettori, and it is exactly what I'm doing today. It's a bit easy because when someone asks, oh, do you want to come to this conference on this topic? I say, oh yes, I have something I've never used that has been in my computer for 25 years. I can do something for it, just to say. What I find fascinating when trying to look at everything is that each project is different objective, different situation, different problems, different solutions. Time passes, the world of printer-publisher evolves, politics play a role, economy changes. From all the cases I have studied, I will try to give you a glimpse of what it is to prepare a book. First stage, you are Piero Vettori. You are asking yourself, what will be your next book? What you really, really like is finding unpublished antique text. Quite a treat, and more and more difficult to find, of course, in the middle of the 16th century. Vettori was looking for that, but he was also lucky. At the beginning of the 1540s, two of his collaborators, Girolamo Mei and Bartolomeo Barbadori, found the lost play of Euripides, like that, lost play of Euripides, Electra. This is the first, it's a small one, so I put a small image. It's an in octavo. This is the first Greek book he will create, and it was published in 1545 in Rome, a very small book, an in octavo of 60 pages. At that time, Vettori had already published books in Venice, in Lyon, probably in Florence, but clearly he didn't have any straightforward solution yet for publishing his books. This one was printed in Rome, probably with the types, the Greek types of Antonio Blado, the printer, which means, I think, that the book was published thanks to the help of Cardinal Marcello Cervini, future Pope Marcello II, who at that time had decided that he wanted to publish books in Greek in Rome, had organized a team and funded the press. But direct sources are scarce. Second best choice is when you find a good manuscript that will allow you to improve the text, usually already published, sometimes more than once. It is what happened for Vettori's first work, the complete edition of Cicero's work in 1530s. It began with exactly that. His friend Bartolomeo Cavalcanti loans him a very important manuscript containing Cicero's letters to friend, Epistulae ad Familiares, now Laurentianus 499. The manuscript was not unknown. It had been seen by Agnolo Poliziano, who Vettori admired very much. At that time, Vettori doesn't have a job. He takes care of the family estate, and so he has time and he begins to work on this text. This is something he learned when he was a student. We have a few books from when he was 19, 12, 20 years old, and he was comparing a copy of a printed book with manuscript he could find in Florence. So this is something he has been doing as a student, and he keeps doing that. Florence is a very small city, and the printer Bernardo Giunta is soon informed about this. The Giunta printers have been operating in Florence since the previous century. They are specializing in publishing Greek and Latin text. But in the first years after the end of the last Republic in 1330, the Giunta have slowed their activity very much, publishing between one and four books every year. Bernardo Giunta himself, who was a Republican, has gone to Venice for a while, working for his uncle Lucantonio Giunta. But at that time, everybody knew we have letters, including from Erasmus. Everybody knew that a proper and new edition of Cicero's work was missing. Bernardo Giunta manages to convince Vettori, who was not that young, but has never done anything like this before, to prepare the edition of all Cicero's work except the speeches, all the letters, all the philosophical works, the treatises on rhetorics, to be printed by the Giunta in Venice. He ended preparing 4 huge in-folios. This is enormous and occupies him almost 4 years. I think it was a trap, but he never did something like that afterwards. He also prepared completely different books, small ones prepared to give his students access to the text they would study during his lessons, photocopies. For example, Demetrius Phalereus in 1542. The only edition available was in the very old Bilg-Aldin edition of the Rhetores Graeci, probably impossible to find or far too expensive. In 1551, we can add Plato's Lysis and Xenophon Memorabilia in the same category, even though there are different small differences. The main thing is that there are texts that are not prepared. They are not really edited. They're just like that. And you see the one on the left was one of the rare copy remaining today that suffered the flood in 1966 in Florence and was saved, as you can see. The books, what I find interesting is that the books are anonymous. There is no name of editor or publisher. Nobody claimed them. They are published by the Giunta, but they don't even use a usual printer device. They use a device where it's a bit more complicated to understand that it's the same Florence flower as usual, but just hardly recognizable. So nobody claimed these books. Vettori was also interested in publishing translations of Aristotle, few of them, and commentaries. He was interested in commentaries, either philological commentaries or more general ones. Sometimes he writes commentaries that are a bit similar to what a teacher will tell his students in the first year of university. You have to explain a lot of things, philology, history, politics, and you explain a bit of everything. He also likes comparing Greek and Latin. I suspect that it was not always easy to agree with printers on how commentaries will be published. For the Cicero of 1536-38, an additional volume or few quires are published separately, are printed separately, and you see the title page is very simple. So I think the idea is that you can bind it with one of the 4 volumes, probably the last one. It's using smaller types, and believing they are very, very small. So you really need to be wanting to read that. A few years later, he will publish in 1541 Cato and Varro De Rustica in Lyon. Something he was genuinely interested in. In octavo again, a small book. And again, the commentaries, as you see, are published separately in a small, very small book. And there are 2 small books, so they are very easy to bind together. Although it took me time to understand it, this is partly why he disliked the Aeschylus that was prepared far from Tuscany, without any input or discussion between Vettori and Estienne. Estienne shows his way of organizing commentaries in 3 different places. So you can see on the left, you have on the last part of the page is a mix of scholia and commentaries by Henri Estienne. And the second page, you have scholia, and the third and fourth page, you have 2 different kinds of commentaries reorganized by Estienne with his own introductory notes at the end of the book. He was mixing Vettori's commentaries with his own. He was changing the text and putting Vettori's original variants in note, and all of this was disliked by Vettori and his friends. Vettori had at his disposal the incredible libraries of Florence, the library in San Marco, at that time the public Medici library from Niccolò Niccoli's collection, and the Medici library that will open to the public in 1571, but was available to him. He published a few books using manuscripts found in the library. We saw the Aeschylus, but which is different from the others. The books printed in Florence using manuscripts from the Medici library are completely different. I'm not sure they were chosen by Vettori alone, wandering in the library on his own. The first one, and the more incredible one, is the Porphyrius of 1548 that has been studied in detail by Rick Scorza. This book is not just a group of obscure Greek texts that were waiting to be published. You can see this unique title page bearing the indication E Medicea Bibliotheca, with no name of printer and no printer device, replaced with an engraving representing the entrance of the library with the pediment bearing Publicae Utilitati, a very important notion at that time, and the Medici ducal crown. The entrance of the library, showing books ready to be read, is very similar to the entrance of the Medici, the Biblioteca Laurentiana, that will open to the public 23 years later. The engraving was created by Vincenzo Borghini. The publication was decided by Cosimo de' Medici. The title page gives a lot of information, but 2 crucial names are missing: the name of the printer and the name of the curator, Piero Vettori. Similarly, we can have a look at the edition of Clemens Alexandrinus' works in 1550 that contains texts that have never been published before. So there was an addition of the texts that have been published in the past. I'm not sure Vettori was really interested in the Greek fathers of the church, but this one had unpublished texts, so something he could do, and was putting together 2 or even 3 existing projects. One was, following the 1548 Porphyrius, printing unpublished text from the Medici library, Ex Bibliotheca Medicia, which is bigger than the name of the author. The second was Marcello Cervini's project of printing Greek fathers of the church. The book is dedicated to him, and the types used are Cervini's. The third project is the appointment of a new ducal printer, Lorenzo Tolentino, who had been appointed to print the famous Pandext, the manuscript from Pisa of Roman law, But while the preparation of the book was taking more time than planned, he needed to be occupied and was asked to publish the book. Cervini played an active role in the preparation of the book. He was sent the sheets during the printing process, and he gave them to Guglielmo Sileto, who will tell Vettori if some parts could be dubious or dangerous for the religion, come dubbi e pericolosi nella religione. As much as Cardinal Cervini had strong humanist interests and loves reading Cicero or Aristotle with friends at home in the morning, the interest of the church in the edition of the Fathers will not be only philological or codicological in 1550. The message was to be carefully controlled. Sileto read it very quickly. I think by the end of July 1550, he knows that Sileto has finished reading it, but Vettori had to wait until November to receive back the text back, together with the dedicatory letter that Cervini was to read also before it was printed. Tolentino didn't want to publish any more books prepared by Vettori after this one, convinced that these humanist books will not sell quickly, with reason. Vettori was not happy to work with them, and they will never work together again. But probably in this case, none of them had any choice in the matter. We'll take another example, a small book, very small book, published in Lyon in 1541, a very small octavo, Vettori's additional commentaries on Cicero that will complement what you will have already published in the Junta's edition a few years before. I'll try to make the story short, but it came from a disagreement with Paolo Manuzio, the son of Aldo, who accused him of having used the ope ingeni rather than the ope codicis when correcting Cicero, and particularly in the Familiares. Vettori felt offended, and nobody could convince him to let it go. We have letters, Francesco Robertello write to him, "Oh, you're more clever than that, let it go." "No, I can't, really, I can't." We see his friend writing to each other, worrying about him. "He's so depressed, I don't know what to do anymore." So we see his friends in Rome, the Furuciti, Donato Gianotti, and others working together in the Palazzo of the Gadda brothers in the Florentine quarter. The palazzo is still there. One is a cardinal and the other is a member of the Rota. They are reading manuscripts of Cicero to try to find variants that will prove Vettori's point. We know that in Florence, the Duke's secretary, Francesco Campana, did his better to help him, and the book is dedicated to him. And the book was printed in Lyon. I'm not sure why, I don't know, but thanks to the help of a Florentine merchant, Riniero Dei, from the same neighborhood as Vettori in Florence, who will go to the printer shop to check the first sheet during printing. An extraordinary story for a very small book. So it happened regularly that others were going to the printer's shop to check the text as soon as the first pages were printed. Students of Vettori will do that for him while he was away from Florence in the summer, lucky him. But for his first book, The Venetian Cicero, although a close collaborator of the Junta in Florence, Antonio Francini, was in Venice working on the book, first pages were sent to Florence for Vettori to check and then sent back to Venice. That seems extraordinary, but we do have letters that say that he has to hurry because the press is blocked. So even when preparing the book, preparing the text, Vettori rarely worked alone. Of course, he will sometimes sit at home or in the Medici library to study manuscripts. He will spend a lot of time annotating his own printed books, and we have hundreds of that. You get used of it after a while, after the first shock. I remember when I was very beginning, I went to see the professoressa Cesarini Martinelli in Florence because she had worked on Vettori for a while. And I was looking at some writing, was very worse than that. And I asked, how do we do that? She said, you get used of it. And you do. So of course, he had to ask for help to have access to manuscripts that were not in Florence. When preparing the Aeschylus edition, he asked around, and Cervini told him that there wasn't any good manuscript in the Vatican Library, but he had found there was a good manuscript in the Farnese Library, and Guglielmo Sirlotto will go there and not variants. We don't have such list. I don't know. It was supposed to be a list. We don't have that. But we do have a small manuscript of the text now in the National Library in Rome, one of their 22 Greek manuscripts, with the text of Agamemnon that was copied by his close collaborator, Girolamo May. And Girolamo May also used a copy of the most recent edition of Aeschylus to compare the text with other edition and manuscript they had at their disposal, doing the same exact work that I was doing when I was studying the edition myself, with marks indicating variants and in what manuscript or what edition the variants can be found. So you can see an example here. But he also had a very, very well organized atelier at home, where his own son, Jacopo Vettori, will help him preparing his books in various ways. He will copy some text for him by hand, leaving plenty of space between lines and in the margins. And these are particularly done specifically to help him preparing the commentaries that he wanted to publish. So he was using the margins to prepare his commentaries, to note quotes from other authors or other passages where he will compare. That's very, very interesting. Sorry, I'm lost. This is, for example, Demetrius Valerius de Elocuzione that Vettori published 3 times. But Jacopo was also having a far more better writing than his father. And he will also make the last copy that will be sent to the printer. And here we have the commentaries on Cato and Varro that was sent to Sebastian Griff. So you see the text written by Jacopo Vettori. You see Vettori looking at it and changing his mind. So I need to add that, and we need to move that elsewhere. And you see the mark from the printer preparing the pagination of the edition. So you see the change of page 41, C9. This one is in the Vatican Library. He will also frequently study the text he was planning to publish beforehand with his students during the year. And then he will dedicate the book to their students while we were studying the text together last winter, and they were helping him. So we have a lot of letters exchanged between Vettori and his printers. The ones with the junta are the more interesting, and we see them working for him. We see them trying to convince him to prepare a new edition of a text, or on the contrary, trying to politely explain to him that times have changed and maybe some texts are now less successful, far in the second half of the 16th century. For example, Filippo Giunta, writing in 1578, "Li tipi greci si adoperano ogni volta che alla vostra signoria tornerà bene, che altro desiderio non abbiamo che far cosa che gli sia grata. Ma vorremmo bene avvertire a dare in qualche libro che fosse più universale, che si potevi, perché oggi i libri greci dormono. Che c'è pochi che vi attendino." So nobody reads Greek anymore, so you need to find a solution. And at that time, he is publishing mainly easy to read texts of Aristotle, rhetoric, poetics, ethics to Nicomachean, with a translation in Latin and with commentaries. Other printers were eager to work with him. Sebastian Griff, who after the first series of books in 1541-42, was hoping to receive new texts, was writing to him, promising to take great care of the next book. That has never happened. Pietro Perna from Lucca, who had moved to Basel for religious motives, asked in 1569 if Vettori would accept to be part of the Greco-Latin edition of Aristoteles that he wanted to prepare, because he said there was a need for such a project and prospective readers were hoping to see it happening. And it was indeed what he was doing. He would use beautiful types, he said. Ramus in Paris had suggested that he contacted Vettori. There is no other correspondence on the matter, and Vettori will not publish it in Basel. And I suspect Ramus was trying to get rid of Ramus. Of Perna. Yes, right to the other guy there. Henri Etienne was the worst of them. impossible to reach, late, 3 years late. And accusing Vettori in the preface of another book is Anacreon to be the reason of the delay because he will not send him the prefatory letter. I'm fascinated by some prefatory letter, this one, but also some by Paolo Manuzio, where people say what they think without making efforts, accusing other people of horrible things. So I give you an extract of this letter, che I will read it in Italian. Non vi ho scritto prima, so a friend of Vettori has a letter for Henri Etienne. His mission is to give the letter to Henri Etienne. Non vi ho scritto prima poi che qui giunsi per avere atteso il fine che avere doveva la lettera che mi deste per Ginevra, la quale per essere stata a diversi accidenti impedita, maraviglia non è se così tardi ne intendete novella e insieme ne avete di essa risposta. Quando passai per Ginevra, come per Messer Giovanni Rondinelli vi fece a sapere, non vi trovai l'amico vostro, ritraendo che per le ville qui vicini, per riaverle forse che una gnaratia di 15 giorni tolto li aveva, si ritrovava. E perché dubitavo che, lasciando la lettera là ove egli si teneva, non capitassi male, mi risolvei a portarmela a Mecco, avendo certeza e di poter sapere quando qui vi tornato fosso e di mandargliene per persona sicura. Non fui appena in Lione che vi ritrasi che egli era in Parigi, dove subito gliela indirizzai, con ordine che, non vi sendo, me la rimandassero. Il che seguì appresso, con relazione che da 2 giorni, anzi l'arrivo di quella, l'uomo s'era partita per Ginevra, dove la terza gitta finalmente la lettera agli mani gli pervenne e se ne ebbe la risposta che con questa vi mando. He had good friends, Vettori, really. So if you don't understand Italian, the guy was trying to go to Geneva, but Etienne was not there, so he kept the letter with him, went back to Lyon, and then when he arrived to Lyon, he learned that the guy was in Paris, so he sent the letter to Etienne in Paris. When the letter arrived in Paris, Etienne was already back in Geneva, so the letter came back to Lyon, and then came to Geneva, and then the answer came from Geneva to Lyon, and was sent from Lyon to Rome. You can imagine that it took months, probably. Of course, Vettori was not happy when he received the book, for a lot of reasons. That was so different from any other book of his that was published. He wrote through the same and Guglielmo Sirleto. I didn't say that Guglielmo Sirleto will very soon be the Cardinal Librarian of the Vatican, but he was also in charge of preparing edition of Greek Fathers to be published in Rome. And he wrote to him in 56. Io detti a stampare l'Eschilo riscontro da me con più testi, e di più arricchito d'una tragedia a Messer Enrico Stefani, già 3 anni sono, e non l'ha ancora dato fuori, tal che mi tengo molto mal servito da lui. Pur vedi per un saggio che mi mandò, che vi aveva messo mano. L'ha fatto in 4 folio, I think it was the first time a book of him was published in 4, con le chiose faccia per faccia, so the scholia were published, as you see in the image near the text, del che anche non mi contento. È ben vero che è assai bella lettera. Yes, of course, at the Grec du Roi. There is no more beautiful Greek font at that time. Come me ne viene alle mani, me ne manderò un volume. Credo anche che ce l'abbia accompagnato con altri scrittori poco conformi a lui. Infatti, no, he added his comments. Tal che harà, per quel che io stimo, fatta una chimera. And there is another letter where someone has seen the book before Vettori and he sent a horrible report. That's horrible, you don't want to see, that's a fesseria, these French people, they are horrible, they don't know what they do, etc. So, but I don't know why we won't see that today. The richness of Vettori's correspondence gives, I was saying, a lot of insight on his work, his methods, his network, his relationship with a lot of people. We may find more traces of the times he was unhappy than the time he was happy. We also see how contacts were made, sometimes through indirect contact. I told you that luck was an important aspect. Things need to happen at the right moment. Various times, Vettori was asked by friends to discuss with the junta printers their project, and various times nothing happened. Even the names and projects of Fulvio Orsini or Carlo Sigogno didn't work sometime. The library of Cardinal Ridolfo was not accessible when he was not in Rome, and his extraordinary manuscript would be temporarily unavailable. So if you were preparing a book and you needed the Ridolfi manuscript, you have to wait for him to go back to Rome. One book that Vettori never succeeded to publish was an edition of Homer's Scholia from a manuscript he had himself in his library. A good friend of him was Bartolomeo del Bene, a Florentine who was valet de chambre du roi Charles IX. One of the many Florentine who arrived in France with Catherine of Medicis, and the Del Bene family will set up in France and become a very rich and powerful family. Del Bene, an author himself, promises on the 7th of March, 1562, to discuss this project of edition with the Chancelier, no less, Michel de l'Hôpital, thinking that Michel de Vascosan would be the perfect choice for a printer. But already on the 1st March, six days before, in Vassy, in the east of France, had happened what is considered as the beginning of the French religious war, the massacre of Vassy. It was really, really not the right moment. So I realized that I gave you a beautiful portrait of this humanist, and I wouldn't want you to believe that I'm completely blind to his work and that he is perfect, and we absolutely need to admire him for everything he did. His library shows us at least one dirty little secret. The time he was lazy and decided to prepare a new edition by making a few corrections on an existing edition. So you see, it changes a bit the title, it changed 2 words, and you see that the printer has prepared the pages. You see the preparation for the new edition. You need a comment of Vettori at the end, rimetti l'opera a questo tutto, sopra questo titolo in principio, etc. So why not? Of course. But what is incredible is that he used an edition from his enemy, Paolo Manuzio. So I have been looking at the life and works of these humanist books, and this is, as you see, far from austere. In their letters and their books, we see them at work, organizing their work, changing their methods. We see them adapting their work to different audiences, to the times, preparing books for their colleagues and peers, for their students, books that can be read entirely or by bits. We see them struggling to do what they want, be happy or unhappy at the result. We see them working in groups, in teams or alone, exchanging information, asking for help, offering to help. This is something I'm really interested in, and although I am currently digging again some of these aspects, on one side, looking at books, published by the junta in the second half of the 16th century, on another side, looking more in detail at the interactions between Florentine humanist and Roman philology, I am pleased to be also working now on a different project, focusing on manuscripts copied in Venice in the 1540s by Francis I ambassador Guillaume Pélissier, leaning more on the history of libraries than ever. I am sure we will speak again about this project very soon with my co-director, Rosa Maria Piccioni, and the team. What I like in this project is that it has a strong digital humanities part, which is something I find more and more interesting. Upon my arrival here at the BSR 2 years ago, I had to take part, to take over, or to launch a new digital humanities project in collaboration with scholars in the BSR or from Britain, and I'm learning a lot. Now I'm looking at what we could develop here, using our research collections, going back at studying the content of the books. I can also do that. I also think that's interesting. And using digital techniques to understand and study them and to convey our findings to a range of audiences. We have exciting plans with the team here in the research collection department, with our director, Abigail Brundin, who is supporting us and bringing new ideas. It was a long path, and I'm far now from the person I was when I was studying Greek and Latin at the university. I have expanded my interest, picking along the way new ideas, new approaches in all the places I have studied and worked. it's exactly what I'm doing here again, learning new skills as much as I can to develop new projects and new research, at least for me. And I am really lucky that I can do so much of it here. And I have every intention to keep doing this and to keep learning and working with existing as well as new colleagues and friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raphaële. That was a wonderful insight into the world behind the book. The sort of very human and often slightly dysfunctional world as well. All kinds of things. My two main takeaways from that is that somebody in 1560 is telling their colleague that nobody reads Greek anymore. That's kind of, in a way, quite comforting. And also that the philological tools that you were using as you set out on your PhD were identical to the tools that were being taught in the classroom in Florence in the 16th century. So just a wonderful line of connectivity between what you do and what Vettori was doing 500 years ago. Thank you. That was wonderful. So let's open it to a Q&A. We have a roving mic. So perhaps somebody in the physical audience would like to kick off. Yes.
Sure. Thank you. That was fascinating. I was wondering on the question of Greek and knowledge of Greek and what kind of print runs did these have? I mean, what was the audience? Who's buying these books, for one? And the other thing is, did they have the format where they had kind of Latin on one side and Greek on the other side? I have a Bible somebody gave me decades ago that has Greek on one side and Latin on the other, and it's kind of useful. But what was that something that he did, or they just assumed everybody's Greek was that good?
So two answers. I know that in people attending these lessons, so these lessons were every morning, were not necessarily, didn't have any knowledge of Greek. So if someone can help that after attending lessons every day, at some point they learn some Greek. So he mostly published Greek edition, just Greek. And for the Aristoteles, so there are only 5 works, 4 Aristoteles and Demetrius Phalereus. So he publishes, he's the first who cuts the Demetrius Phalereus text in parts, so the number comes from him. So he will give just a paragraph or a few phrases, and then the Latin, and then a commentary, and then the next one. This is why I was saying that it's very similar to a teacher in the university. So you read, you read with you the text, you read the original Greek, and immediately the Latin is just behind, and then the commentary, so you're sure you understand everything. For the audience, we have letters saying, I received your letter. It doesn't say, I've read it entirely or something like that.
Thank you, Raphaële. That was really, really fascinating. My little small encounters with Vettori have always been with him as a published letter writer. You know, the fact that there are actually, that some of his correspondence gets published in his lifetime as you know, for students to imitate, basically, because of his writing style, I assume. And I was wondering, in some sense, because you've given us this beautiful overview of both Vettori as an editor of text and also as a letter writer. I was wondering if you could sort of comment about his letter writing more widely, and the way in which the letters that he publishes of himself, the letters that he publishes, how they, you know, how they sort of sit with the private correspondence that you've just been using in your talk. Sort of like, is there a published persona of Vettori that comes out in his published work that is very different from the Vettori that you can see in the private letters that you've been working on? Or are actually these letters very similar? Like, I'd be really curious about your reflections on that subject.
At the very end, we have very few letters from him. We have Latin letters that were published 1 year after his death by his grandson. We have more letters received by him. So we have a few minutes of letters, but not enough. So, yeah.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I mean, this is kind of along the lines that Jan was asking. One of the things I love about the history of the book, like you're doing and like you're showing, is the way it invites us to kind of read against the grain, to kind of read what they aren't trying to tell us, to read the things, to uncover the things that the book itself is, the process of the making and what goes into it is telling us, rather than the kind of, you know, the swans gliding smoothly across the top of the lake. So I don't know if you have something about your own love of that or experience with that you want to share. I have one other kind of particular question, though, which maybe if you don't want to do that, you might answer. If not, you could tell me later. I mean, this is just about Florentine politics and scholarship I wanted to ask you. The names I'm seeing you presenting there, Girolamo May, Vincenzo Borghini, etc., are people that are very closely connected to the Medici regime. And yet you have him in touch with all these fuoriusciti, and of course you've mentioned his own career. The role that frontispiece in the role of the Lorenziana is very interesting. Michelangelo, of course, too, but also the way it's being handled there as a kind of with the Medici stamp. So please answer either one of those.
I'm not sure I understand the second question. What is the question?
Just about his about the politics of his publications, given that we have him on one hand, you show him corresponding with fuoriusciti in Rome, and then also these things are being presented very much as Florentine, or very much as Medici endorsed types of things.
I think when he accepted to become a professor in 1538, he just joined the Medici regime, and he accepted a lot of charges. He even became a senator, so he just joined like everybody else except the one who have left the city. And I have the feeling that there were still contacts between the people, because there were, yes, I was from the same street and from the same church, and it was not a problem. I think that very funny, there is a letter from Donato Gianotti when he's preparing the new commentaries on Cicero, and Donato Gianotti writes, oh, you really need, I think you need to dedicate the books to Giovanni Gaddi, because he's doing so much to help you. But no, at the very end, the book is dedicated to Francesco Campana, the secretary of the Duke. So I think it's normal, it's okay that the Florentines Rome are helping you, and people in Florence will find that normal. They are from Florence too, but there are limits. I can speak afterward about that.
Thank you so much for this rich presentation. I was quite intrigued by the Latin publications, and I wanted to focus on them. I was so struck by the Trinity, I suppose, Cato de Agricultura, that must have been in the Rustica, and then the Columella. Was this done for practical reasons? That was one, as it were, question, and perhaps commissioned. And then I was thinking, I was also, a question of ignorance, surprised by what he didn't touch. Did he not turn his hand on Virgil, Terence, Caesar, because these would have been, Raphael, the authors, as it were, connected with education already in antiquity, and one would have thought that I understand Cicero, of course, in that respect, and perhaps a question for clarification. What would you say, Costas? He was a good editor or just a run-of-the-mill editor? An average editor?
I think he was a good editor for his time. He was really careful in choosing variants, and he was very careful of not inventing variants. He was really interested in agriculture. His only proper text is, he wrote two texts in Italian, and one is about la coltivazione delle olive. I'm not sure if it was born from the fact that in 1530, after the Republic, he left Florence to go to the family estate in San Casciano in Val di Pesa, where there were a few estates there. The Machiavelli family was nearby, But unfortunately, it was on the road to Siena. So on the Landscanet in 1527, I passed twice there. And there was a lot of work to be done, and there were olive trees. So this was really a topic, agriculture, he was really interested in, and we see that in the letters. After Cicero, and after Cato and Varro, it was very interesting in that, it stopped published Latin until, I didn't say anything about that, in 1576, he published Seneca, but it's again, ex Bibliotheca Medicea. In between, he only published it in Greek. No, sorry, no, so not Seneca. My mistake. He published only Sallust, which is a very strange choice about the conjuratio, speaking about conjuratio in Florence in the second half of the 16th century. So it's not completely innocent, I think. But meanwhile, he only publishes in Greek and is interested in Greek.
Can I take Chair's privilege? I have a question. It's about title pages and visibility, because there was one clear example where he's plastered all over in foot-high letters, but in most cases, his contribution is relatively invisible.
Either it's completely invisible, or I have a question in the chat, or I will answer.
Those, yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So I can show. Does it work?
Yeah.
The two options are possible, and sorry, it takes some time. Here. So these are 3 editions of Greek text with the translation and with the commentary. But the junta decided to put the name of Piero Vettori first. So here you are at the very end of the 16th century. And if you look at the junta catalog, they don't publish this kind of book anymore. They publish all other things. But Piero Vettori will sell, or the Medici family is paying, I don't know. But it should be Aristotle, De Moribus ad Nicomachus, it should be Aristotle Poetics, but it's Piero Vettori. So we have really the 2 options. Sometimes he acts as an employee of the Duke, and sometimes he's the well-known humanist. There is a sad story. If one of them, the last one, is dedicated to Francesco Maria della Rovere, but why? And it tells in the preface that during the summer, so the guy is 82 years old. During the summer, Francesco Maria della Rovere came to visit Florence. And the Grand Duke asked him, Ferdinando, I think, asked him to come back from San Casciano in Val di Pesa to offer a visit of the Biblioteca Laurentiana to Francesco Maria della Rovere. So he was still an employee of the Duke.
Thank you. Shall we take a question from, so we have a question asking if you could say a bit more about Vettori's admiration for Angelo Poliziano. Why did he admire him? What was it? Better editor?
Thank you, Cynthia, for the question. That's absolutely incredible how much he was fascinated by Poliziano, who has been in Florence. And he was trying to work in the same way as Poliziano was working on manuscripts. And we have, I was speaking about the books he was annotating when he was a student. And he had, at that time, he had a completely different writing. And I think he was trying to imitate Poliziano's writing. So what he was admiring most of the methods of reading ancient text. And there is a question by Patricia Osmond.
Yes, asking if you could say something about copies of his editions annotated by contemporaries or later scholars.
So I didn't study that much. I'm not finished with his own sources, but I know there are a few in Mouren Library here in Rome, for example. So there was some. There are letters about people buying his books and studying them. I tried to look at the Aeschylus one, and there is one highly annotated in Oslo, I think. But a lot of them are very pure and beautiful, so probably not read that much. But I didn't study that very much.
have another question from Jan.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pick up on, your answer to Abby's question about the title pages where Vettori's name is completely effaced. He's just not there. Is he really not there anywhere in those editions? Those are the editions you showed earlier, the ones where Vettori is not on the title page. There's not even a dedication or is he at least mentioned inside?
No, he writes, so I don't know how he did that, but in his book, he always writes a prefatory letter, always. Whatever the printer, beginning or end of the 16th century, Vettori's book has a prefatory letter or even two by Vettori himself, always.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, just the whole project from a humanist perspective makes no sense, right? I mean, you're not publishing these books for financial gain because there isn't one. So the only reason to do it is for academic, prestige. So if you're publishing an edition anonymously without any form of credit, it would be bonkers. So that makes that makes a lot more sense now. Thank you.
It also makes me wonder if there's an issue of decorum, though. I mean, there's a bit, if we're talking about marketing, by the time we get to these editions, that's rather a different question. But perhaps the, self-respecting humanist wishes to appear in the prefatory letter, but not on the cover of the book.
That's the case for the small books, the photocopies. He doesn't want to have his name on it, and there is no prefatory letter, nothing. That's just 30 copies for the students, and that's all. I think that's a bit different from for the ex-Biblioteca Medicea, where it was not his project. I don't think so.
Somebody, Raphael, is offering you an answer to your conundrum. Do you think it's right?
Yes, no, Nikolaus Ober is one of them, Patricia, but there are a lot of others and some German too. Yes.
Do we have any other questions in the room? Oh, we do.
Yeah, thank you very much for the wonderful talk. At one point, you alluded to his interest in comparing Latin and Greek, and of course, his letters are also in the vernacular. And I was just interested, at any point, does this moving between the Latin, the Greek, the vernacular rise to a level of reflection upon language? What are the advantages? What are the uses, the appropriate uses for the various languages that he has at his disposal?
The correspondence is mostly in Italian, and we have one letter, I don't remember by whom, I remember it was a bishop saying, "Oh, I'm writing a letter in Latin to you, but because I have something urgent to say, I'm writing now in Italian. But then you will receive the letter in Latin." So because you're writing a letter in Latin to Vettori, it has to be perfect. And if you want to say something, you write in Italian.
Okay. Oh, yes, at the back. James?
Thank you very much. I have a question about Vettori's personal library and what happens to it after his death. Are these books that he's owning and annotating kept together, distributed among friends? What happens?
That's a part I cut. So the library was kept by his family, and I was showing the last image was part of his books. In the beginning of the 18th century, where they were in Rome, in the library of the Cavaliere Francesco Vettori, who would give he was a collector, art collector. He gave his collection to the Vatican Museum, and he had most of the books rebound, and on the spines it was saying with manuscripts annotation by Piero Vettori. So this was very an interesting approach. Or you can imagine the library. It's a total of 650 books, but not all from Vettori. It could be from other members of the family. And you can imagine the books that show on the spine immediately what is their interest. They have annotations. And they were sold, the library is sold in 1778 to the Elector of Bayern. And it goes to Mannheim and then to Munich. And it's still in the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek now. And it was used during the Napoleonic occupation. And it was studied a lot by philologists, Hellenists, who published articles publishing Vettori's annotation. There was a big interest in the 1815-25 by philologists and students on Vettori's annotation. And the library is still there, except a few of them that were stolen and are in other libraries. I won't say where. A few of them that were stolen by the French, and unfortunately they made a mistake. When they sent it back, they sent another copy. But mostly it's still there in Munich.
Oh, thank you.
And it's very interesting because Munich has been digitizing a lot their books, and Vettori's books are used by a range of people for a lot of topics. So regularly I'm at a conference, I say, oh, Vettori.
Thank you. So to end on the fine note of the French stealing things and then sending back the wrong copy, that was a really stimulating lecture and a very stimulating and full conversation, which I think is a reflection of how much we enjoyed it. So we will now thank Raphaële so much, and then please join us upstairs for a drink.